Hey guys, Lukey here, coach of your Elvine City Beacons, and welcome back. This is the DPDL Super Low Tier team review, and basically I want to go through and talk about some of my guys, talk about the draft that I had, which I would describe as poor. Spoiler alert. Talk about the season and what I would do right or what I would do to try and change things in the future. And just give you a little bit more insight into what my thought process was at the time and what I learned as a result of those decisions. So I'm here. You can see this is my team page on the draft.nl website. This is how the team finished the season, but originally it looked very different. And I'm going to take you quickly to a little spreadsheet because it's the only real remnants I have. Actually, maybe I can take you down here. Now you can see some of my transactions, but not all of them. So let's take you. You can see you're going to see some of my other teams. Oh, there's my underused team, and this is my private friends league. But here is DPDL low tier. You can see my mouse is circling around the squad. I have in this column the Pokemon that were swapped out and how I sort of broke down the points. But it also is an indication originally of where I drafted these Mons from rounds 1 through 10. So you can tell that there's a number of changes at the top of my draft, and that's really where the issues started. So let's have a look at the team as it finished. Again, Bolton was not my first pick, and I think it's Cam Ditzler in the Yorkian Megas, I think is his usual squad name. Also drafted Bolton, but he made the playoffs in the other division, and if you want to have a look at a team that much better supported that game plan, have a look there, because he also used the Bolton Thwacky core, but much more effectively than I did. And that's partially because I was lured in by the raw power and speed of Bolton from Omerta's post in the forum, and I was looking at my draft, and again, look at who I drafted at the start. I went big in on Mismagius, Lantern, and Kangaskhan, which might have been an interesting core. There's a number of resistances there. But I just wasn't happy with it, and I thought Mismagius was going to struggle. And I think looking at some of my other matches this season and looking to see how Ghost types did, I think that was a correct assessment. But I went for Bolton because of, for this power level, good power, great speed. And the speed ended up being sort of a sticking point with Bolton because Bolton is fast enough to outspeed the entire unboosted metagame, but that didn't mean a whole lot in the matches because good prep and good coaches, again, I went 2-5 this season, so, and one of my matches was week 1 that I won, and the second one came right down to the wire. Coaches took advantage of that, and sure, Bolton was my kill leader, had 8 knockouts, got knocked out 6 times. It did its job most of the time, but there was a couple of matches where it was complete dead weight, and there were certain teams with physical walls or usually rock types that just completely crapped on Bolton, and what was supposed to be the star of my team actually really struggled. And even though I had Primeape here of 17 points, he was one of my late picks because I was looking and thinking, wow, I could really use an offensive fighting type. I don't know why I was thinking that, because you look at my squad and you wonder where the bulk actually is. But I got lured into Primeape because I thought, wow, Bolton, Primeape, big breaking core. Primeape can take on the rock types that Bolton doesn't like, and again, that's where the idea went astray because I didn't think about the next step. Well, what does Bolton do to help Primate? And the thing is, even though they form a fairly potent volt turn core in theory and on paper, I got sucked into the idea of, all of this. Oh, that's the draft. I want to go to roles here. I got sucked into the idea that I would be pivoting on everybody. But the thing is, when you're both fast pivoters, so Bolton is coming in with the Volt Switch, Primate with the fast U-turns, and Primate loved to run Choice Scarf, and in matches where I thought speed control wasn't as much of an issue, I brought Expert Belt. They can't pivot into each other because they're both so frail. So I spent a third of my budget, 35 out of 110 points, on two Pokemon that both hit hard, and look, they both got knockouts, and I was generally pleased with their performance, but I didn't build a team around them that gave them a chance to really shine. And even though I had lots of options through Grace trades, for some reason, I was so set on Primate, and eventually I spent big points and an in-season trade to pick up Thwackey, but there is Chestnut sitting undrafted, completely open, and would have been, I think in a lot of ways, the perfect Pokemon for this team. Not that it would have changed some of the other structural problems with the team, but it would have given me a lot more. If you look at my typing chart, again, this team struggled with water, generally speaking, and I desperately needed a ground resist. And Thwackey was that, but I mean, Chestnut was underused in its previous generation. It's so much better. It probably shouldn't even have been available to be drafted. But it pairs so well with Lantern for a couple of reasons. One, the ground resist. Two, Lantern takes fire and flying type moves that Chestnut doesn't like. Chestnut can take the grass type moves that Lantern doesn't like. That would be a way better core, and we're talking about, freeing up Lantern to do what I needed it to do, which was be a special sponge, and Chestnut could be a bulky physical tank. Also, things like spikes, having synthesis, being immune through its ability bulletproof to things like Sludge Bomb, which my team, would have appreciated being immune from at times. I was sucked into the idea of trying new things and going more offensively and having all these pivoters, but clearly from the start of my draft there were issues with the team and how I built it that just never quite got resolved. So that's how I feel about sort of the big three of my team. If you look at them, again, 51 points. And Thwackey I only brought twice towards the end of the season, and I went 0-2. It never scored a KO. I never felt really comfortable using it, and my team didn't live long enough. It wasn't bulky enough to ever get the benefit out of grassy terrain. So again, if I were to do this again, if I was starting with Bolton, or I, get Bolton in a Grace trade, try and build cores around it. Because Bolton has, it's a good typing electricity, but Bolton's not taking hits from anything. It's got the defenses of a wet tissue. So you really have to invest in those other things, and I was, I guess, trying to do it with low tier mons, but even then I wasn't adequately patching up those weaknesses. So again, Bolton was super fun to use. I'm using it in another league that's ongoing, and there it's more of a support fill-in Pokemon for my big guns, but certainly lesson learned there that when you're taking your top mon, if you're going to spend big points on something, especially in a low tier format where I feel like, between tiering efficiencies in the draft, and the general power level of lower levels, it does pay to go for a lot of lower level mons because you can get more of them. So if I were to do it again, I would build a bulkier support core around Bolton that would allow it to come in and break things and do its job more effectively, whereas I spent big money on Primeape and Thwackey and didn't get great returns, especially on Thwackey. It was a huge disappointment, and whereas there are just clearly better options on the table. Even at one point when I was thinking about getting Thwackey or doing swapping out some of my other mons, James Vivid suggested Blossom, and I think that's a Pokemon that could be really worth a look. And then there's things like Ludicolo, who's one of my favorites. I think would have been a huge boon against a lot of my opponents who really would have struggled against the rain setup. And then even at 11 points, Vanillux I think is super under tiered. So and some of those break. I mean, obviously Blossom's a setup sweeper, but Ludicolo, Shiftry, Vanillux, Trevenant, these are hard-hitting wall breakers that were available, had various levels of defensive synergy, and could have, I think, provided as much or more value than, say, Primeape, especially given the lack of defensive options. So looking at a little further down the draft, I went with Articuno, and this season I tried to make Articuno work in 2 leagues, and it turned out it didn't work in either. And I took some heat when I got rid of Articuno. I traded Articuno for Ice-Q, who we won't really talk about anymore because Ice-Q didn't come to any of the games, and Wormadam Sandy, who actually ended up being a really nice pickup, and who I am really wanting to use again in the future. Articuno, big base stat total. For 9, I was looking at it, it was about the only Pokemon that I looked at. I got fixated on these mons, and I'm thinking like, yeah, it's underpointed, it's undervalued. Why don't I draft it? Meanwhile, I look over here, Aurorus, a far superior Pokemon, Avalugg, a far superior Pokemon, and even, situationally, Bayarctic for fewer points, Maywile, things like that. And I took some heat when I traded Articuno because people were talking about how it was something they always prepped for, and Articuno had value because teams prepped for it. The problem is, even at this level, and especially looking at the Pokemon that were drafted and populating the higher levels here, Articuno struggles against almost every one of them, and at the very least, even the ones that it's super effective against, it can't switch into. So Articuno didn't provide any defensive utility. It lacked the boosting ability to break through some of these checks, and I didn't have the weapons available to support it. So Articuno was a big disappointment, and you really have to draft around it to make it work. But again, I was drafting things that I thought would be fun and individually look cool, but didn't work well together. So there's Stantler, which I didn't bring. When I found out after I drafted it that it had Jump Kick removed in Gen 8, I was very sad. So I didn't bring him along. Maybe some other time. But Kling Klang is sort of the last of the Pokemon that I picked up and then traded. Can we go? I picked up Kling Klang, because, well, in June, this was sort of I was, just really diving into drafting and draft teams. And, what I could see from cores is like, you need some of these typings to help you out. And Steel, Fairy, Dragon is sort of the in vogue core. So what did I do? I drafted only one part of that. And I thought Kling Klang would be the big setup sweeper. And there was a bigger issue with Kling Klang on this team, is that I didn't have the defensive backbone. I don't know his season stats. I think I brought Kling Klang once. And maybe not even at all, because I traded him for Thwackey. And Kling Klang, again, I thought was like, wow, 11 points for this thing, under tiered. But then you start looking at the matchups and the opponents I was playing, and you look at the Pokemon that are drafted high up. Klinklang doesn't do a goddamn thing against most of them. And Klinklang really struggles with being a steel type that's not that good defensively. If you're using Klinklang for defensive utility when it's got no reliable recovery, um, it gives itself chances to set up, but it's another Pokemon that you really have to plan your team around, and it doesn't work as well as some of the other steel types, even in a tier range where it is, there's not a lot of competition for it. Um, and again, I in terms of what I would do differently for Klinklang, um, this will be part of my greater wrapping up of the team at the end, is looking at cores, and you see a Pokemon like Mawile with Steel Fairy typing, Intimidate, Sheer Force, an incredible move pool that's got everything it needs sitting around, including the ability to set up for 5 fewer points. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's only after weeks of going through this list over and over again and seeing where the value was, did I realize just how poorly A, I drafted, and B, how poorly I recognized some of the bargains out there by getting sort of enamored with the shiny new toys that I hadn't tried yet. So that's it for sort of the middle part. I think there's one more 10-point mon. Sandslash, I only brought him 3 times. He was super disappointing. He was my ground type, but the thing is, I had the big bad electric on campus. Raichu Alola, yeah, Sandslash wasn't doing a damn thing. That's why I drafted Lantern. It was supposed to be more the physical wall of the team. The problem is when you invest Sandslash so heavily into defenses, he gets passive really quick. And I couldn't compress all the roles that I wanted in one set, being able to deal damage but not, be super passive, to have a rapid spinner and a stealth rock setter, because this team struggled for rocks constantly. Another Pokemon that just, and again, you look at my team and you're like, all right, who is he taking hits from? Lantern doesn't need him. Thwacky is covered by other things. Again, another Pokemon that could have done so much more on another team, or another team built for it. Not that there was a whole ton of great grounds available, but heck, even something like Stunfisk I think would have provided better value, dishing out hits and being a general nuisance with its typing. And because there's really no drawback, because Sandslash didn't even love staying in on Earthquakes, because it gets worn down so quickly. So definitely disappointed with that pick. Oricorio was a Pokemon that I brought a lot. I brought it 5 times. It did absolutely nothing, basically all of the time. I've tried to bring it as a defogger, as a setup sweeper, as a wall breaker. I brought it mostly as Oricorio Ghost. I did bring it as Fire, I think, once. The Ghost type, because, again, Ghost offensively is so good, and Ghost flying defensively is a good typing. It just didn't work on this team, again, because who is going to sponge something for the Ghost type? Bolton's not going to switch in on even strong electric moves. Thwacky, maybe. Lantern, maybe. For dark type moves, Lanoon Galar, again, not much of a defense there. And so often, then you have to consider whether a Pokemon has coverage. So Oricorio could have been a lot cooler. I didn't get the most out of it. Its stats are so average is part of what holds it back. And there are, whatever job you wanted Oricorio to do of various types, there was something better out there that I could have drafted. For a ghost type, I mean, Dusclops straight up is, let me just see, he went undrafted. Nope, not Dusclops, sorry, Dusk Noir. Yeah, so Dusk Noir, rated below Dusclops, by the way, it was 9 points. You know, would have been leaps and bounds better than Oricorio for the role that I tried to give it. Magcargo. So Magcargo was really fun. I, for I guess a mid-tier fire type, it patched up a lot of weaknesses on my team, and on paper at least. But it created a lot of problems too. Magcargo was actually the MVP week 2 against the Wonder Pets, the stall team, and I just couldn't keep Jumpluff alive or have Jumpluff keep Magcargo alive long enough to fully break through the team. But it Shell Smash set with the right situation and the right support, like say from Jumpluff against passive teams, worked wonders. Every other time I tried to bring it, it was useless. I tried to bring it as a rocker, I think 2 or 3 times, and spread burn, try and be a nuisance, but every single team has ground and water type attacks, and Magcargo has such an abysmal special bulk that even fully invested, it just can't act in a defensive role, so it's not really a defensive fire type. I would love to try and draft a team that better uses Magcargo, because what I ended up happening, and the reason I had to go to Thwacky foolishly, is because, you know, this team just completely lacked any kind of glue core to hold it together. And if I did have a fire water grass core, it was either Thwacky, Lantern, Magcargo, which just never quite gelled together, especially in Team Builder, or Jumpluff, Magcargo, who have good defensive synergy together, but poor defensive ability on their own, and then Lantern. And basically all of my losses, a common theme was, you know, once Lantern got worn down, everything else just kind of crumpled because I used it and needed it to do too many things. And again, so Jumpluff only came twice. I didn't get the most out of it. It needed to be, I needed to use Subseed more often. But again, some of the teams, there were strong fire and strong physical attackers down there. Jumpluff got scared away quite easily. It was great in one game where opponent didn't have a grass type and I was just able to subseed freely on stall. It's great against stall, but most people don't draft that in Draft League, and so Jumpluff really struggled, and I wasn't able to get the most out of, say, an Acrobatics set. Lanoon Galar, such a fun typing. This thing is a glass cannon. It fires all kinds of knockoffs around. In the game against Akana, I let it die super early against Sableye, which I did not realize got Drain Punch, and it needs to be used so carefully. It's basically a knockoff and parting shot bot. It doesn't have much else going for it. You know, the stab boosted facade on Quick Feet can make it really, really fast, but it's not so fast that it's going to be outspeeding, say, in my last week against Emily, her Shell Smash Turtonator, and if it gets hit, it dies. So Lanoon Galar was fun. I'm using it in another league. It has similarly mixed results. It's what you get with, these early root normals, even if they get a new coat of paint. Finally, there's Wormadam Sandy. I picked up Wormadam late season because I needed just a low tier setup sweeper. It gets Quiver Dance. Its bug earth typing is awesome. Unlike Sandslash, it can actually function as a decent physical wall, it has similar physical bulk, but actually has a setup presence. Um, Wormadam didn't do too much, but it got 2 really fun KOs off of the Quiver Dance set. And I think the Wormadams are slightly under tiered, and that a smart trainer in future seasons, and maybe a smarter version of me, um, can get more out of them because it has such a good move pool for what it is, and such a unique typing. So anyway, to sort of wrap up the team, again, what I would do differently. First off, have a draft plan. Bolton becoming a thing after the fact in Grace trades is already a bad start because you're trying to fill in holes after the fact. And notwithstanding, there's a crap ton of Pokemon available. I was, so focused on using all of my points and using the tier list as a guide to see what was good that I didn't really trust my gut and sort of go look through where the value picks were. A lot of my guys were over tiered, or even if they were fairly tiered, they weren't the right pick for me. My team was fast and guys hit hard, but there was no defensive backbone after Lantern that I could rely on. And part of that reason is, if you look at my type chart, again, let's look. Fire, Water, Grass core is super mediocre, where it's like some combination of this, and then Lantern and Thwackey, which is a decent defensive core, but it's relying on a not fully evolved Pokemon, and there's still some super hard-hitting Pokemon in the lower tiers here, and so you have to be careful. But also, absolutely no Fairy Dragon Steel core to speak of. Not that there's a lot, but even a Fairy Steel core, I think would have gone a long way to help this team. Again, I've talked about Mawile. It's one of my favorites for a reason. It is so versatile. It is the glue that holds teams together, especially if you have a good ground resist or immunity. Wow, it still pairs fairly well with Meganium and a water type. Yeah, so many ideas I would want to try out. I would love to have this draft again with this list and just try and have a second run at it. But again, Fairy Dragon Steel, there's Duraludon sitting out there, Clefairy sitting out there. There's not, Wigglytuff. I'm trying to get away from using Wigglytuff, but try and again, you don't have to necessarily get obsessed with cores, but what I've learned this season is cores are a good way to just have a backbone for a team, like especially against Emily in the last week. She had a traditional set of cores, and that just gave her such a nice backbone to the team. Or when I played James Vivid, his team didn't have a traditional Fairy Dragon Steel core. Well, actually, it had a Alolan Exeggutor, Granbull, and Probopass, so it kind of did. And it looked unorthodox, but it gave him a lot of versatility within that. So just drafting those types, they just tend to naturally work well together. And in the lower tiers, we end up with a lot of more defensive Pokemon, and they can still work really well that way. So my goal for next season, I'm probably going to pick just one league to be a part of. Whatever one I think has the lowest of the low tiers, because that's what I enjoy. If you're looking to snipe me, I'm looking for cores. I'm gonna spend a lot more time looking at Pokemon that actually pair well together, as opposed to just following sort of Pokemon that look fun and that I haven't tried yet. So anyway, that's this season review. This video is at a half hour. If you've listened all the way to the end, thank you so much. It's really cool that you're doing that. Hope I could provide you some entertainment, and we'll see you next season. Bye.